Welcome everybody to today's webinar, What's Happening in PWS Research. I'm just going to give everyone a minute to pop in. We have a lot of attendees coming and joining us today. All right, we're going to jump right in. So once again, welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm Susan Hedstrom, the Executive Director for FPWR, and I'll be acting as today's moderator. On today's webinar, we'll provide an update on ongoing research activities, new outcomes from FPWR's research programs, and a brief introduction to each of our newly funded grants. We would love to answer any and all of your questions today, so we invite you to submit your questions at any time through the Q&A. With that, I would like to introduce you to someone who needs no introduction, FPWR's Director of Research Programs, Teresa Strong.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you to everybody for joining us today. I'm going to jump right in since we have a lot to cover. Today we'll be looking at an update on PWS research activities. As Susan said, we'll be looking at the new grants that we've awarded in the spring of 2023 and invite your questions. So Susan will be monitoring those, and I think if she may interrupt me, which would be great during the presentation to take some of those questions. And then we'll also have questions at the end. So I just want to remind you of the process by which we develop new therapies for any disorder, including PWS. And that usually starts on the left with the research and discovery process. So that is really understanding what is different in PWS compared to typical cells, for example, or in a person with PWS compared to typical individuals, and just gaining knowledge about the details of those differences. Once we understand how a cell or a person with PWS is different, we might identify pathways in the cell or in the person that could be changed with drugs or other interventions. And the preclinical, the next level, is to test those drugs or interventions either in cells from individuals with PWS or maybe animal models of PWS to see if they do help us recover function and return to typical function. If that looks good, we move into human clinical trials. Phase 1 is mainly a safety study to make sure that the drug doesn't have any unexpected side effects. And then in phase 2, you start looking at whether the drug works the way you think it's going to work. And in phase 3, that's typically the pivotal trial. So the final trial that shows that the drug is safe and has efficacy. And then we have the post-approval phase, which is using either approved drugs or other interventions and trying to optimize how it's used in the PWS population so that everybody benefits. So that is the process, and FPWR is interested in accelerating every step of this process. So we do that in a number of ways. We support research along this entire spectrum. We also support the development of tools and programs that facilitate each of these steps and might help researchers at any point along the way. Another really important aspect of FPWR is convening people, so bringing people together so that they can exchange ideas and, again, accelerate this entire pathway. So fostering those collaborations that make things move faster. We also, as I mentioned, and I won't go into it very much today, we have built a number of tools and programs at each point along this spectrum to help move things forward more quickly. I will, of course, just give a little bit of a shout out to the Global PWS Registry, which is important across the board. So helping us understand how individuals with PWS differ from typical individuals, everything from that all the way through to optimizing care, understanding what kind of care people are getting and how they're doing with that care. So you'll be seeing later on in the year, and we'll talk about it some more, you'll be seeing some changes in the Global PWS Registry. We're very excited that NORD is introducing a new platform. If you have filled out surveys in the Global PWS Registry, thank you. But you know that maybe it's not the don't want to say clunky, but it's, there's room for improvement, and the new platform will offer additional functionality and some new things that we can do. So we're very excited about that. Look for that later in the year. But I do encourage you, if you are not a member of the Global PWS Registry, please join, because it allows us to understand what's going on in the entire PWS population. If you're in there, if you would go back and update your surveys on an annual basis, that is really helpful for us to have the most up-to-date data about what is going on in the PWS population. And we're happy if you have any problems, if you run into any glitches in the registry, please reach out to us and we'll help you get through those. So I wanted to give just, everybody's always interested in clinical trials, and I wanted to give a brief update on some things that are going on the industry front. First, I want to, if you're not familiar with it, just mention that FPWR has a venture philanthropy program where we make, well, relatively small investments compared to how much money it takes to get some of these clinical trials done, but where we make investments in biotech companies that are developing new drugs for PWS. And we were very excited to announce another one of these investments about a week or two ago with Palo Biopharma. This is a company in Spain that is running a phase 2 clinical trial in Prader-Willi syndrome with a PWS expert there, Dr. Kasich, who is also a member of the PWS Clinical Trial Consortium. It's a new drug that is being tested in PWS. It's a PDE10 inhibitor, which may have broad effects, including reducing appetite in PWS. So we're excited to see that trial moving forward, excited to partner with them and really evaluate whether this might be a helpful drug in PWS. And these are the other trials that are currently either ongoing or recently completed or about to get going in PWS. So as you can see, compared to 5 or 10 years ago, it is a very active clinical trial landscape. And I'll just remind you that the only way that we're going to get all of these clinical trials done is for families to consider enrolling in clinical trials. Of course, it's always a personal decision. It is a big commitment. We understand that not everybody can do it, but it is true that the only way we're going to get new treatments for PWS is to be able to evaluate them in our population. So I'll just highlight a couple of them. Soleno Therapeutics has the drug DCCR that we've heard a lot about. Their phase 3 clinical or pivotal clinical trial is completed. You may recall that they part of that trial, the end of that trial was during COVID. And so the results from the pre-COVID part of the trial were very encouraging, but they got a little bit muddied, just like everything else in the COVID portion. So the FDA wanted additional supportive evidence of efficacy. So FPWR has partnered with Soleno to allow a comparison of individuals who were not enrolled in the clinical trials, who were in the Path for PWS natural history study, compared to individuals who were receiving DCCR in that clinical trial. That compared very favorably, so showed a lot of benefit for those individuals receiving DCCR, both with respect to reducing hyperphagia and also with respect to improving behavior. So that is one piece of additional supportive evidence. And then Soleno has also extended their clinical trial to have a new phase, which is a randomized withdrawal phase, where some individuals who are receiving DCCR now don't receive DCCR, and that will be an additional potential supportive evidence. And Soleno just announced, I believe this week or last week, that they have enrolled that randomized withdrawal portion of the trial. And so we should be hearing some results from that in the coming months. Also give a shout out to Harmony. which is looking at pitolisant in PWS. They have completed a phase 2 trial. They'll be presenting that data next month, I think, at the annual sleep conference. So we look forward to seeing that data. Just highlighting a couple of the others that are currently or about to enroll. Gideon Richter is looking at a new molecule, looking at the MCH pathway, and they have multiple sites that they will be looking at that in individuals with PWS over 17 and above. There is a trial in New York with Dr. Hollander looking at a CBD molecule, CBDV, in children and adults with PWS. There is an entirely remote study using bright light therapies, so a non-medication to improve circadian rhythms and daytime sleepiness, and that will be is getting started. And then we'll be talking more over the coming months about a vagus nerve stimulation study that FPWR is going to be initiating in the next couple of months. Just want to tell you a little bit about that. So this is a trial that is going to look at the safety and efficacy of a wearable device. So this is an external device that actually puts an electrode next to the ear and stimulates the vagus nerve through the ear. And the thought is that this stimulation of the vagus nerve may reduce temper outbursts in individuals with PWS. So we know individuals with PWS are prone to having a lot of temper outbursts. These persist into adulthood, and they can be really hard on everybody, right? So they're hard on a family. To have these outbursts, it is difficult for the person with PWS. They don't enjoy it, but are, not able to control it well. And it really is life limiting. So, getting a job out of high school, for example, it's hard to keep a job if you're prone to yell at people. So reducing temper outbursts, I think, is a really potentially important way to improve quality of life and the ability for the individual with PWS to attain their goals. So we'll be looking for people aged 10 to 40 with PWS who have a history of temper outbursts. And this is going to be a 1-year study, but we only have 2 in-person visits over that 1 year. So it's almost entirely remote. So we hope to make that, we hope that will make it easier for families to participate. FPWR is going to be sponsoring this study, and that's because devices don't have the same financial incentives that orphan drugs do. So drug trials are very expensive. They're beyond what FPWR could fund because they're usually tens of millions of dollars. Device trials can be less expensive, and there is not the financial incentive for the manufacturer to do the clinical trial. So our feeling is that it is likely that if we're going to see this trial get done, it is going to have to be done by the PWS community. So, we're going to be sponsoring that. The goals are shown here to evaluate the safety, acceptability, and efficacy of VNS in reducing temper outbursts, and look at, other impacts on quality of life or hyperphagia or other behaviors. As I said, this clinical trial will be opening probably over the summer. If you are interested, you can send us an email to this address down here, vns@fpwr.org, and we'll get you on a list and we'll keep you updated as sites become open for that. So I just wanted to pause there and Susan, see if there are any questions before I go on, or should I just plow ahead?
Teresa, we did have a couple of just further inquiry questions into the VNS study. You mentioned that it'll be opening soon. Do we know where those trial sites will be?
We are working actively with about 10 different sites right now and trying to get contracts into place. We're trying to make sure that it is geographically distributed. It will be only a US-based study just because we don't have the bandwidth to move to other countries. But if you're from Canada and want to talk with us, we're happy to look at options. But we're going to be trying to make sure that we're hitting, broadly across the US. So hopefully everybody is kind of close to at least one site, but we don't have any sites completely nailed down yet. Dr. Deepan Singh, though, is going to be the principal investigator for the study. So there'll be a site in New York for sure. And then, as I said, we're talking to many other sites.
You mentioned an email address for people who were interested. What was that email address for folks?
So vns@fpwr.org. And we'll get you on a list, and then we'll be able to keep you updated as developments occur.
Great. Earlier, you were talking about the DCCR study, and it's currently going through a withdrawal study phase. Do we have a timeline for when that drug might get approved by or get applied to the FDA, perhaps become available to people?
So I don't want to speak for the companies, but I would say that I think we can expect that if they're done enrolling the randomized withdrawal, that will probably go through the summer. You have to give them several months to analyze the data after that. And then they would, talk with the FDA about submitting a new drug application. It would take a couple of months to get that together because it's all of the data, from all of the clinical trials that they've done, as well as preclinical data. Then they would submit that to the FDA. The FDA would have, I think it's about 6 months to look at that. So I think, best case scenario, like getting all the way to approval, it would likely be, towards the end of 2024. But again, that is a Teresa Strong estimate. That is not a Soleno Therapeutics estimate. So I would look to the company to really, as they move ahead and they understand, where they are along the steps, they'll be giving updates to the exact timeline.
Great. Thank you so much. We're ready to continue.
Okay, great. So we'll turn to the FPWR grants program, which is where we expend most of our funds that are raised by all of you. Thank you. And that program to date has more than $20 million invested in PWS research. And we fund grants again across the entire spectrum. So insight into gene function and new targets for drug development and small clinical trials. And as I mentioned, an important part of that is also bringing new investigators into the field and helping them collaborate with established PWS investigators. So just some of the outcomes that we've seen over the last few months. Here are some papers that have been published, and these publishing papers is critical in the scientific community because it allows people to build on other people's observations, and it helps them think of new things to investigate and move ahead in the therapeutic pathway. So here are just several publications, which I won't go through in detail, except to say you can see that it really spans the spectrum from everything from molecular studies of how oxytocin works to how insulin is not secreted well in PWS. So what's the basis of that, and can we improve that? Just highlighting one of those studies that has come out, there is a new rat model of Schaff-Yang syndrome and PWS that's just been published. So this was an FPWR-supported effort. And then Rodney Samacko at Baylor College of Medicine led the group that looked at the physiologic and behavior characteristics of this rat model. So this model is got a mutation in the MAGEL2 gene, which is mutated in Schaff-Yang syndrome and missing in PWS. And the paper showed some behavioral changes, showed changes in the physiology, so in their respiration, as well as some cardiac abnormalities, very subtle but important cardiac abnormalities, and behavioral changes in their socialization. So it's a good starting point from which to look at different interventions and understand how that might improve these characteristics. And a nice thing about these models is that model is now being shared with many other labs. For example, the Yosten lab we'll hear about today is looking at a new drug and seeing if that, what impact that has on the rat model. The Schaff lab is going to look at the neurobiology of these rats, and the McLickey-based lab is looking at feeding behaviors and metabolism in this rat model. The other new outcome that I'll mention is from the Vanderbilt group, who has worked with PWS, individuals with PWS for many years now, and really appreciated the fact that adolescents and young adults with PWS really struggle with their social interactions. They want to be social, they want to have friends, but they're not very good at it. And so the Vanderbilt group has now developed an online curriculum to help improve social skills in our adolescents and young adults with PWS. And they did a study. My son was in it. He loved it, it really helped him with communicating with others and appreciating others' viewpoint a bit better. And the Vanderbilt group has recently published on this, showing that it is feasible and that it improves loneliness and social isolation in our adolescents and young adults with PWS. Now, that's great to have in the literature, the medical literature, but it's not, what we need to do is get it back out to the community. And so we funded the Vanderbilt group again to develop this curriculum, which is now on our website. And there's a parent guide for parents and clinician. And then there's the full curriculum, which is a 10-week course with more than 30 lessons as part of that. So that is available, and we're happy to discuss, getting a group together and, applying this curriculum to help our kids socialize more effectively. Also want to mention, one of the important things of our grant program is getting investigators started on a line of investigation that they can then be competitive for additional funding from government organizations. In the US, that would be the National Institutes of Health. So NIH grants are generally much larger than what FPWR can offer, but they're very competitive. So letting them get a start with a funding from FPWR and then a larger grant from the NIH, for example, is a great way to really expand the amount of work that is being done in PWS. So just want to report on a couple of those successes that have occurred in the last few months. Dr. Nichols started a project looking at gene therapy for PWS and was successful in securing a larger grant from the NIH to continue that work. Dr. Kelleher, some of you participated in her intervention for caregivers to reduce stress in caregivers. We all know that if a caregiver is stressed, it really doesn't help anybody in the home, especially the person with PWS. So they've been looking at telemedicine ways to reduce stress in caregivers. And they now have a new large grant from the NIH that will allow them to expand that program to include another 200 caregivers of those with PWS. So we're excited about that, and we'll share more details as those programs become available. And finally, Dr. Godler has been looking at developing a newborn screen for PWS and other chromosome 15 disorders like Angelman syndrome and duplication 15. And we have funded him to develop that newborn screen. The goal of that is really that every child with PWS is diagnosed right in that newborn period so that they have access to all of the important early interventions. And he, with our funding, has developed those tests, has done small pilots to show that they're cost effective, because if you're going to screen everybody in the population, it has to be very cost effective, and now has received additional funding, a $3 million grant from the Australian Medical Research Future Fund to look at 100,000 newborn babies, do the screening, and then look at the impact of that, like getting them right into the early intervention system. So, again, these returns on investment or leveraging our relatively small dollars into bigger dollars to really impact PWS research is a really important aspect of our grant program. Okay, so now I'm going to switch to talking about the new grants that are funded in 2023. We have 13 awards, more than $1.9 million. I don't think I'm going to talk about all of them today. There's a couple that the contracts have not been signed yet, so I'll be talking about the ones that we're at the end of contract negotiations. But These grants, again, like our grant program, span everything from very basic biology all the way through advancing new therapeutics. So I'll just go through all of those. So here's a list. We have 3 in the sort of the basic biology or discovery research. We have 4 that are in the new targets or preclinical realm, and then another 4 that are a little bit further along, some of them still preclinical though, about but very specific, advancing specific therapeutics ahead. So let's do the basic biology ones first. And as I mentioned, 3 of those. So we have a postdoctoral fellowship about MAGEL2. We have a mapping of hypothalamic architecture and a study looking at the role of olfaction or odor detection in PWS. And as a reminder, my favorite diagram is the PWS region of chromosome 15. PWS is very complex. All of the genes that are shown in blue are absent or not expressed in our kids with PWS. So as you can see, it's not just a single gene, there's a number of genes. But one of the most important ones in this group is the MAGEL2 gene, and that's what the first project really focuses on. So MAGEL2, as I said, is either deleted or inactivated in all of our kids with PWS. It is also mutated in those kids who have a related syndrome, Schaff-Yang syndrome. So understanding what MAGEL2 normally does is really important if we're going to compensate for its mutation or its loss. And to do that, we are funding, this is a longer term grant than we typically fund, but we really feel like understanding the normal biology of MAGEL2 is critical to developing new therapies. And so what we're going to do is fund a new postdoctoral fellow in the lab of Christopher Schaff. Who obviously, since it's Schaff-Yang syndrome, it plays a very important role in understanding Schaff-Yang syndrome, but also PWS, because this gene, again, is missing in PWS. So the rationale for this project is for this postdoctoral fellow to focus on understanding the normal function of MAGEL2 and then how loss of it or mutation of the protein, the gene in the protein, causes the issues that we see in PWS. This project is going to support a postdoctoral fellow for 3 years to really focus on these questions in Dr. Schaff's lab. We're excited about this because, it's really a long-term commitment, allows them to really, dive deep into the function of MAGEL2. It is going to, Dr. Schaff has a really robust and, exciting lab. And I think, this individual will learn a lot about both PWS and Schaff-Yang syndrome. The long-term goal is to understand the normal function of MAGEL2 and develop assays. How does that function change when we lose MAGEL2? And can we see that in a cell so that we can then be, for example, testing compounds to maybe recover that function? And presumably those potential therapies would impact both PWS and Schaff-Yang syndrome. The second study in this first group is mapping the hypothalamic functional architecture underlying appetite control in the PWS brain. And this project is to Dr. Yao at Cambridge University. And this group has been really leading the way to understanding the function of the normal hypothalamus. So they've used these cutting edge technologies, single cell nuclear seq, to look at the typical human hypothalamus, understand what cells are where and what those cells are doing. And now he's going to apply that knowledge to PWS. So he has a long-standing interest in PWS, has done PWS research in the past, and now wants to use that same technology to look at a very detailed level at how the hypothalamus molecularly is different in PWS compared to typical individuals. So the goal of the study is to use advanced genetic technologies to analyze PWS hypothalami at the single cell level, create a detailed spatial map of the PWS hypothalamus that can be used by any researchers in the field. So we're excited about this research because this group, they're world leaders in applying this technology to understand the human hypothalamus. They're also experienced in PWS research, so having knowledge in both and being able to apply that is really attractive. They're going to be using some of the human brain tissue that has been donated by families that have lost a loved one with PWS. We've partnered with Autism BrainNet to facilitate collection of those samples, and I really can't think of a better group to use these samples to help us understand how the PWS hypothalamus differs from a typical hypothalamus. So the long-term goal is to identify the dysregulated appetite circuits, so how the circuitry in the hypothalamus is different, and that should inform identification of new therapeutic targets. And again, the generation of this resource that can be used by all researchers who are interested in the structure of the hypothalamus in PWS. The third project in the first group of molecular and neurobiology is a project about deciphering the role of olfaction in PWS. So we know that obviously smelling food plays an important role in controlling our food choices, in controlling our motivation to go for food and our food preferences. And Dr. Stekelorum hypothesizes that PWS may be associated with changes in that neurocircuitry. So the perception of food odors, and that may be contributing to some of the behaviors that we see in PWS and that drive to eat. So she and her collaborators are going to study the role of olfaction, and they're going to use both mouse models of PWS and also individuals with PWS who have received a treatment to see if that treatment is impacting their olfactory circuits. So we're excited about this project because it's looking at a different area of PWS research. They have intriguing preliminary results. They're going to be looking at mouse models, but they're also collaborating with Dr. Taubert, who has been doing a clinical study in which infants with PWS are receiving oxytocin, and they're going to be looking at how that oxytocin is impacting the development of their olfactory circuits. So this may provide a new direction for PWS treatment. It may provide an understanding of how the oxytocin treatment is impacting hyperphagic behaviors down the line, for example, and may guide us in developing more effective therapies. Okay, so now we're going to move to the group of grants that is really looking for new targets of therapies in PWS, and we have 4 grants in this group. The first grant that we'll be looking at in this group is a project by Dr. Mitchell, who is just now moving to Princeton University, and some of you who have been in the PWS field for a number of years, who have older individuals with PWS, may remember Beloranib. Beloranib was a drug that was tested in individuals with PWS probably in like 2014, 2015. And this drug really showed a lot of efficacy. So individuals had reduced appetite, they were losing weight, they were feeling better. All of that was great. Unfortunately, the drug also, because of the way the drug was formulated, probably, it increased the risk for blood clots. And 2 individuals in the large clinical trial for Beloranib had fatal blood clots. So the company tried to use a second generation of the drug, but ran into similar problems. And then unfortunately, the company folded. But we were left with a couple of really important lessons. The first was that it was the first demonstration that a drug actually could reduce hyperphagia in PWS. Up till then, it wasn't entirely clear that any drug could reduce the drive to eat and cause weight loss. So in that way, it was really successful in showing that it is possible to target these pathways in an individual with PWS and have a meaningful result. And the second lesson was, what was going on that, these drugs were reducing appetite. So that has been a lingering question, and one which Dr. Mitchell is going to be addressing here. So she is characterizing in mouse models now how Beloranib is working. So what are the targets of the drug, and can we use that information to develop new drugs that hit that same pathway but don't have the safety issues that Beloranib ran into? So we're excited about this study because it is a researcher who is experienced in obesity drug development. She has a long-standing interest in how Beloranib works, so the mechanism of action of Beloranib. It has a very high potential for clinical impact, since this is a pathway that we know, if we're able to manipulate it, it really has a clinically meaningful impact in individuals with PWS. And it leverages knowledge from a failed study, hopefully to improve therapeutics in the future for those with PWS. So the long-term goal is to identify novel drugs that will leverage this pathway and have similar efficacy with a reduced risk of having, the safety concerns and the blood clot that was associated with Beloranib. The next project in this category is looking at a particular neuron, the MCH neuron, and looking at how dysregulation of that neuron is important in PWS. So we know people with PWS have high levels of REM sleep. So they have daytime sleepiness, they sleep at inappropriate times. And this melanin concentrating hormone, these neurons that make MCH, may therefore be overactive in PWS. So this investigator will be using neural activity indicators to understand these MCH neurons in PWS and look at how they're not functioning normally in the PWS mice. So we're excited about this project because it's an experienced sleep researcher that is new to the PWS space. We know that sleep issues in PWS impact a lot of things. I mean, it's not really just about daytime sleepiness, although that can be a big problem for kids, achieving all that they can in school, for example. But it's also the fact that that sleepiness correlates with a lot of behavior and psychiatric problems in PWS. So it may be that correcting one will correct a number of behavioral issues as well. So the long-term goal here is to establishing whether this particular neuronal system, the MCH system, is at play in PWS and, may be amenable to targeting with drugs. And next, we have actually two projects that are looking at the microbiome in PWS. So we know that the microbiome, I think it's been appreciated over the last 5 or 10 years, that not only is the microbiome, or the bugs that live in your GI tract, not only is it important for helping us digest food, but it's also important in our mental health and, things like how motivated we are to exercise, for example. So it has a lot of impact beyond just, helping us digest food. And Dr. Hack has been looking at some interventions using fibers and wants to understand how that impacts the gut microbiome, and importantly, how the gut microbiome influences metabolites, or those small molecules like amino acids and lipids that circulate in our body, and how those things might impact our mental health and our drive to eat, for example. So she is going to be looking at PWS-associated metabolite profiles and exploring the links between these blood metabolites, the gut microbiome, and metabolic health in PWS. So she's partnering with experts in the field. They're going to be using blood from individuals with PWS and looking at how these metabolites are associated with all of those parameters. So we're excited about this study because it's an established PWS clinician who's collaborating with some experts, some world-leading experts in metabolomics, and it will help us understand the gut microbiome in PWS and how manipulating or modifying that gut microbiome could improve metabolic health. And the long-term goal is to establish a basis for targeted dietary or fiber or other interventions, probiotic interventions, to suppress appetite and improve metabolic health and behavior in those with PWS. The second study focusing on the microbiome is a sort of an extension of a study that was done by this group, Dr. Lerin and his colleagues in Spain, looking at a probiotic supplement, BP1. And what they found, they have done a clinical trial in individuals with PWS, shown that this probiotic supplement changes the microbiome and shown some benefit in mental health and also in adiposity, so amount of fat in individuals with PWS. And they really want to understand what is driving those positive changes to see if they can improve upon the therapy. So they're going to be looking at the metabolites again in these individuals who have undergone this therapy and see if they can figure out how that is impacting cellular function using organoids or mini brains in a dish. We're excited about this data because the study because it leverages data and samples from a clinical trial of this probiotic supplementation, and it's using some cutting edge technology to understand how the benefits in this therapy might be working. And the long-term goal of the study is to look at the molecular mechanisms regulating energy balance and thinking about how those probiotics are impacting those aspects of metabolism. Again, to guide, better and more effective probiotic therapy in PWS. Okay, last group of grants, thank you for hanging in, is those grants that are really looking more at specific therapies and how they might be applied to PWS. So the first one in this group is a sort of an extension of a previous grant from Dr. Cow's group. So their lab has been interested in how a specific neuropeptide, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, how that might be used in PWS. We know that BDNF is decreased in individuals with PWS, and Dr. Cow has shown in a mouse model of PWS that if you use a gene therapy approach to increase the level of BDNF in those mice, it improves their metabolic health, it improves their socialization. So both metabolism and behaviors improve in that mouse model. Now, doing a gene therapy of BDNF in individuals with PWS is probably a long way off because it would require actual delivery to the brain. And so one of the things in studying how the BDNF was working, what they saw in the lab was that it looked like in the PWS mouse brain, there was a lot of inflammation. These cells called microglia, which are sort of the brain's immune cells, there were a lot of them, and they were in an activated state. When they delivered the BDNF, that decreased, so the inflammation decreased. So now they want to ask the question, okay, was the beneficial effect due to decreasing that microglia activation? And if so, might there be other ways that could get into the clinic faster to reduce the activation of the inflammation in the brain? So in this study, they'll be looking at whether microglia structure, function, and genetic profile is altered in the PWS mouse, and whether if they remove those microglia or inactivate those microglia, if you get the same beneficial effects. So we're excited about this study because it is an investigator. They've made great progress in the previous funding that we gave them. And they're looking at these microglia, which are, I think, being more appreciated as being really important in regulating things like obesity in the general population, and also might be at play in PWS. There's data from other investigators that activation of the microglia might be common in PWS and might be driving some of the, the obesity and poor outcomes that we see. So directly addressing these abnormalities in microglia may offer a quicker path to a therapy than, a gene therapy of BDNF. So the long-term goal here is to develop a therapy that targets inflammation in the brain and hopefully brings about changes, beneficial changes to metabolism, energy balance, and behavior in PWS. We are also funding a second year of funding in Dr. Yostin's group. She is using the rat model of PWS to evaluate a particular a hormone CART, which is known to be important in regulating appetite. And so they are looking at interventions to target that target CART as a way to improve appetite and behavior using this mouse model. So this is, again, an extension of a prior year of funding where they got some promising results. It has the potential to have translational impacts to move into the clinic in PWS. This is a great lab. If you were at the Chicago meeting, the whole lab came and they were, they're very enthusiastic about PWS research. The ultimate goal of this project is to design effective CART-based drugs to treat hyperphagia in PWS. And CART is a neuropeptide that has roles in reward, feeding, and stress, all of which we know is very important in PWS. Two more to go. This project is from Dr. Blewett in Australia, and we have funded Dr. Blewett before. She is looking at epigenetic therapy of PWS, so looking at ways to activate the genes that are present but silent in all individuals with PWS and also in individuals with Schaff-Yang syndrome. So everybody, Schaff-Yang, PWS, they all have a maternal chromosome 15 that has the appropriate genes sitting there but silenced. And she has studied this protein SMCHDI1, which regulates sort of the on-off switch of the PWS region. And what she's looking at is whether you can inhibit SMCHDI1 and allow expression of the PWS genes. Inhibiting SMCHDI1 is a potential genetic therapy. She's done previous studies that shows that when she inhibits SMCHDI1, she does get expression of the PWS region genes. It's low, but it's there. And so now she's looking at ways to enhance that level of expression. She's also in the study looking at, mouse models versus human cells, because it'd be important to show that it's just as effective in humans as it is in the mouse models. So we're excited about this study because she's a very experienced epigenetic researcher. She's applying her knowledge of the control of this entire region to the problems of, activating genes in PWS and Schaff-Yang syndrome. And this is a novel approach and has the potential to, at least in theory, be a transformative therapy because it activates all of the genes. It's mainly focused on like the MAGEL2 and the nectin genes, but might also be applicable to all of the genes across the region. And that's what she's going to be looking at here as well. So this study lays the foundation for therapeutic inhibition of SMCHDI1 as a treatment for PWS and Schaff-Yang syndrome. And finally, we have a study from Dr. Laura Hulson, who has a long-standing interest in Prader-Willi syndrome. She did some neuroimaging probably about 10 years ago that showed, how activation of different regions in the PWS brain is different in PWS individuals compared to other individuals when they see food. And she has been collaborating with a larger group, some of whom we also funded in our last round, looking at not the role of the hypothalamus, which is, has been implicated in PWS, in which there's a lot of work going on and we want to continue that work. But what they found is there's actually a different circuit that starts in a different part of the brain, the Cerebellar circuit, and that it's very important in satiety, so how we feel full. And so those studies were published recently, and they describe this new satiety circuit. And we're funding Dr. Chen to continue those studies and look at that in mouse models of PWS. And now we'll be funding Dr. Hulson to look at whether we can start using a non-invasive therapy to impact the circuits in individuals with PWS, potentially reducing hyperphagia. So they are looking at this particular circuit of satiety in PWS, and what they're going to do is test whether a particular type of non-invasive neuromodulation called transcranial magnetic stimulation can impact this function and reduce food intake in individuals with PWS. So this is another example, not of a drug intervention, but of a device intervention in PWS, and looking at whether that might have efficacy in addressing hyperphagia. So this is a novel brain pathway that has just been described by this group and their collaborators. It was recently implicated as being altered in PWS compared to typical individuals. And we know TMS, or this transcranial magnetic stimulation, has been applied to other disorders like OCD and depression. So it's been shown to be safe and effective in those indications. And so it's going to bring that knowledge of this new circuit together with this non-invasive therapy and assess the safety and efficacy initially just in a very small trial. We anticipate that it would take additional studies to really demonstrate safety and efficacy, but this will be a start for them to see how best to do these studies and show whether this intervention might be helpful in PWS. So we expect that this study will lay the groundwork for optimizing this intervention and stimulating this circuit in a way that will reduce hyperphagia and increase satiety in PWS. So that is all of the new grants. I just want to remind you of some upcoming research activities. We're going to have some new opportunities in the global PWS registry, particularly for infants and small children with PWS, so in the 0 to 4 group, to gather some more information about, the challenges that that group is facing medically and otherwise. We'll be launching the VNS study over the summer. We'll be looking for the outcomes of the randomized withdrawal portion of Soleno's DCCR studies. And we hope to see you in October. There'll be a lot to talk about in Denver at our conference. We will have a lot of great investigators there. We'll be able to talk about all the research that is going on, and we hope to see you there. So I will stop there and spend some time answering questions.
Thank you so much, Teresa. As everyone saw, there's a lot of research happening, and it's really because of all of our supporters that this research is possible, both donating, fundraising, and most importantly, participating in these trials when the opportunities arise. So at this time, we're going to jump into Q&A. If you do have a question, you are welcome to submit it through the Q&A section here on Zoom. We have a couple here in the queue, Teresa, that I'm going to present to you here. First, we've had a couple actually coming in regarding semaglutide in individuals with PWS. These are the weight loss drugs like Ozempic, Wegovy. Is there any research on their use in people with PWS, or do we need to have research done specifically for Prader-Willi?
Yeah, I think there's some great opportunity there. So there's a new drug from Lilly, tirzepatide, which is, I think the brand name is Mounjaro. There's Wegovy, which is a semaglutide. And I think those are all approved. I imagine that older individuals who are obese and have diabetes, clinicians will start using it. So we'll start getting some anecdotal stories, but really we would want to do a clinical study. I think there are PWS clinicians who are interested in doing such a study. There is potential funding. PCORI is what they call comparative effectiveness research, which allows you to compare approved drugs to each other, and there's funding for that. So I think it's worth pursuing, and I hope to see a study coming together. We'll do what we can to facilitate such a study in our patients with PWS. But I think it's, who knows? There have been a lot of drugs in the past that have worked and others that haven't worked in PWS, but these drugs really show an anti-obesity effect in the general population. So we hope to see, we'll see if that carries over to PWS, but it's encouraging.
Mhm. There's another question here in regard to Neuron's drug, NNZ-2591. Can you talk about what that is and what people might expect from that program?
Again, I'm a little bit reluctant to talk about a drug company's drug. So I would direct them to the company who will be, I think over the next few months as their trial gets closer, we'll be talking to families about that. I can tell you it is a drug that works on the IGF-1 system. So on that system that impacts not only growth hormone, but other hormones. And it has been approved in Rett syndrome. It seems to improve some of the behaviors in Rett syndrome. So it'll be interesting to see what it does in PWS. So I think the best thing is for me to not say any more, since I don't want to speak for the company, but it will be, I think they'll be looking at sort of developmental milestones and things in that trial. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how it impacts that. And we'll look forward to hearing more from Neuron about that study.
Great. Previously, FPWR conducted a genome study for people with Prader-Willi syndrome. Is there an update on how that's going?
Yeah, actually, so we did a pilot study in which 50 individuals with PWS got whole genome sequencing, and the idea was to see how genetic variants outside the PWS region might be impacting severity of PWS, for example. So all of the sequencing is done, and the pharmacogenomic aspect of it is completed, and we'll be getting that back to families probably in the next month. The analysis of all of the variants, the genome is very big. It really takes a lot of time for the researchers. So they are in the middle of going through case by case and looking at all of the variants. It takes about 40 hours per genome to really do the analysis. So it is ongoing. I imagine the full analysis will probably take to the end of the year, but we will be returning information and sharing data over the coming months on that one. So yeah.
What about, we have a question about the VNS study. What are the ages that individuals can participate?
Ages 10 to 40. So, we chose those ages because it's common for little kids to have temper outbursts. Where we start to see it diverging from the typical population is over the age of 10. Most 10 and adolescents they have some temper outbursts, I can tell you from having typical adolescents, but it tends to be at a much lower level. So we're going up to the age of 40. There's some indication that it might not work as well in the older individuals. So we really want to do the first study in that 10 to 40 group. So broad age range.
Great. Thank you so much for clarifying on that. People have asked about how can you get this presentation or get information from this presentation. We have recorded today's webinar. We will send it out by email once this recording is available to all of you who have registered. Information about these projects are also available on our website. And we recently today just published a blog that included short descriptions for each one of these projects. So if you want to check out the blog, I would encourage you to go do so. Otherwise, again, this recording will be shared with everyone who registered today. Thank you again to all of you for coming, listening. I know that this is a lot of information to try to take in. I think the big picture here is there's a lot of research happening, and there's a lot of reasons to be very hopeful for the future of our kids and adults with Prader-Willi syndrome. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you soon. Have a great day.
Thanks.